High School.
October 28, 2022. Destiny of Faith Church, Brighton Heights, Pittsburgh. Mourners sit in silent, listening to the obituary of 20-year-old John James Horneasus Jr. The pastor's voice fills the sanctuary with memories of a young life cut short. Families clutch each other, tears flowing freely. Then gunshots explode outside the church walls.
In High School.
Panic erupts instantly. 300 people scramble for cover behind pews. Children scream. Adults dive to the floor. The pastor abandons his podium. What was meant to be a peaceful farewell has become a nightmare. 6 people lie bleeding on the church compound, while inside terrified mourners wonder if they'll make it out alive. To fully understand what happened at that church, let us rewind back to October 15, 2022, when a routine gas station visit turned into a deadly shootout that claimed 3 lives. The young man whose funeral would be targeted 13 days later was among those killed in that parking lot massacre. October 15, 2022, a Saturday night that started like any other in Pittsburgh's North Side. The Sunoco station on Cedar Avenue served as a neighborhood hub, people getting gas, buying snacks, waiting for buses. It was ordinary until it became extraordinary in the worst possible way. At 59 years old, Betty Jean Ayer was a grandmother of 7 who took the same bus route every evening after visiting family. She knew the schedule by heart. The number 54 arrived at 10:08 p.m. at the stop right outside the Sunoco. She'd done this countless times before. Jacqueline Mahalik, 33, was rushing to make her late shift at work. She had 2 young children at home and couldn't afford to be late. She walked quickly past the gas station, checking her phone for the time. Neither woman had any idea they were about to become victims of someone else's war. Meanwhile, 20-year-old John James Horneasus Jr. had arrived at the same gas station with 2 associates. John had just celebrated his birthday in August. His godmother described him as ambitious, but struggling to find his path in life. Like many young men in the area, he'd gotten caught up in neighborhood disputes over territory and respect. The beef that would cost lives had been simmering for days. It started, as these things often do, over something seemingly trivial. Who could stand where? Who controlled which street corner? Social media amplified the tension with cryptic posts and deleted stories that investigators would later piece together. On the opposing side was Sharon Troutman, 19 years old, along with Jaylon Hines, 21, and Samuel Pegas, 30. Text messages recovered later revealed escalating threats and shared locations. Someone mentioned meeting at the Sunoco. Someone else said they'd handle it. Security footage shows the timeline of tragedy unfolding. At 9:45 p.m., John Horneasus Jr.'s group arrives at the gas station. They don't go inside. They're waiting for something or someone. At 9:50 p.m., a black Hyundai Tucson appears on Cedar Avenue, passing the station twice. The driver is conducting surveillance, checking who's present. At 9:55 p.m., Betty Ayer reaches her bus stop. She sets down her purse and checks the schedule. 13 minutes until her bus arrives. 13 minutes she doesn't have. At 9:58 p.m., Jacqueline Mahalik hurries past, late for work. She has 17 minutes to live. At 10 p.m., the Hyundai returns and stops. Sharon Troutman sits in the passenger seat. All 3 occupants are armed and ready for confrontation. What happened next lasted less than 2 minutes but changed everything. Witnesses heard someone shout across the parking lot. The audio on surveillance footage is unclear, but those words triggered a firefight that investigators would reconstruct from 23 shell casings of different calibers. Multiple shooters opened fire from both sides. John Horneasus Jr. and his associates drew weapons near the adjacent park. The men in the Hyundai responded immediately. Betty Ayer, caught at the bus stop, either froze in confusion or didn't understand the danger until bullets found her. Jacqueline Mahalik was trapped in the middle, walking between the shooters and their intended targets. By 10:03 p.m., the shooting had stopped. The Hyundai sped north on Cedar Avenue. One of Horneasus' associates stumbled to a white Hyundai Palisade with Florida plates and fled the scene. John Horneasus Jr. lay dying in the gas station parking lot. Betty Ayer had collapsed at the bus stop where she'd waited so many times before. Jacqueline Mahalik was on the sidewalk, blood pooling beneath her on the concrete. The first 911 call came at 10:05 p.m. There's people shot everywhere. Oh my God, they're not moving. Despite being just 1 block from Allegheny General Hospital, emergency responders couldn't save any of the 3 victims. Jaylon Hines survived with a bullet wound to his leg, but 3 lives were lost in a conflict that had nothing to do with them. Betty Ayer died waiting for a bus. Jacqueline Mahalik died walking to work. John Horns Jr. died in a war he helped escalate. But this story doesn't end with their deaths. In the culture of the streets, every killing demands an answer. Every death requires revenge. And funerals? Funerals become targets. October 16th, the morning after the shooting, Mayor Ed Gainey stood at the corner of Cedar and Stockton. Bloodstains still marked the concrete behind him as he addressed the media and the community. "I couldn't imagine what that feels like," he said about the victims' families. "We need the entire city to come together to deal with this violence. I know it's tough right now. I know there's a lot of families and friends who are hurting, and I know a lot of them feel like they should do something." His plea for information would prove more successful than anyone expected. But while the mayor asked for community cooperation, different conversations were happening in certain neighborhoods. Conversations about payback, about who needed to pay, about which funeral to target. By 4 a.m. on October 16th, Pittsburgh Police Major Crimes Unit had transformed the north side into an evidence grid. 50 detectives worked around the clock, analyzing footage from 6 different surveillance systems: Sunoco cameras, Giant Eagle security feeds, ATM, footage from across the street, traffic cameras at Stockton and Cedar, and even a Ring doorbell from a house 2 blocks away. Detective David O'Neill led the video analysis team. Every camera angle told part of the story, and the black Hyundai Tucson appeared in frame after frame with its license plate clearly visible. Within hours, they'd identified the owner, Samuel Pegas, 30 years old, with a criminal history, including a 2013 drug manufacturing conviction. The white Hyundai Palisade with Florida plates proved more challenging to trace. It appeared briefly in surveillance footage, picked up one of Horns's wounded associates, then vanished into the night. Something unusual happened on October 16th. Phone tips began flooding in. Not just 1 or 2, but dozens of calls from community members who'd witnessed the shooting or knew the participants. "I saw who was in that car. I know where they went after." Check this Instagram story from last night. Commander Ford would later say he'd never seen this level of community cooperation in a gang-related shooting. The difference, many believed, was that Betty Ayer and Jacqueline Mahalik weren't targets. They were innocent victims, and killing grandmothers and mothers crossed a line that even street code couldn't defend. The arrests came quickly. October 17th, Jaylon Hines was arrested at UPMC Presbyterian Hospital while still recovering from his leg wound. He faced 2 counts of criminal homicide for the deaths of Betty Ayer and Jacqueline Mahalik. October 18th, U.S. Marshals located and arrested Sharon Troutman. The 19-year-old had been in the Hyundai's passenger seat during the shooting. Ballistics would later match his weapon to bullets that killed John Horns Jr. But arrests don't stop street justice. On Pittsburgh's north side, revenge and justice often wear the same face, and somewhere in the city, men were already planning their response to John Horns Jr.'s death. October 20th, just 5 days after losing their son, the Horns family met with funeral director to plan John's memorial service. They chose Destiny of Faith Church on Brighton Road, a place of peace, a sanctuary where families could say their final goodbyes. That same day, the threats began. Text messages appeared and disappeared quickly. Social media posts were deleted minutes after being shared. Words were whispered on street corners and in barbershops. The message was consistent and chilling. John Horns Jr.'s funeral wouldn't be peaceful. The family heard the rumors. They knew the danger was real. Street retaliation doesn't respect sacred spaces or grieving families. October 26th, they formally requested police protection for the service. Pittsburgh Public Safety approved the request immediately. 2 officers would be assigned to provide security during the funeral. The service was scheduled for October 28th at 11 a.m. Everything seemed in order. The family had requested protection. The city had approved it. Officers had been assigned. What could go wrong? October 27th, the day before the funeral, the assigned officers received their deployment orders. But somewhere between dispatch and deployment, a critical error occurred. The address they received wasn't for Destiny of Faith Church on Brighton Road. It was for a funeral home 3 blocks away. October 28th, 7 a.m. 2 Pittsburgh police officers arrived at the funeral home address they'd been given. The parking lot was empty, no activity, no signs of preparation for a memorial service. They radioed dispatch, "No funeral scheduled at this location. Stand by," came the response. The officers waited. At 8 a.m. they checked again. Still nothing. At 8:45, with no funeral in sight, they left their post and returned to regular patrol duties. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away at Destiny of Faith Church, mourners began arriving for John Horns Jr.'s 11 a.m. service. Paige Davis, John's godmother, noticed immediately that there was no police presence. "Where are the officers?" she asked funeral staff. "They should be here." "We requested them," someone replied, but no one could explain their absence. By 10 a.m., the hearse had arrived, and still no police were in sight. By 11 a.m., over 300 mourners filled the church. Gospel music played, prayers were offered, and outside, multiple shooters took their positions. The church's security camera recorded everything with precise timestamps. At 12:02 p.m., a figure in dark clothing appeared at the corner. Then another. Then more. Inside the service, the pastor spoke about forgiveness, about breaking cycles of violence, about young lives lost too soon. His words about peace and redemption filled the sanctuary, while outside, fingers rested on triggers. At 12:04 p.m., the shooting began. The first shot cracked through the Brighton Heights afternoon like thunder. Inside Destiny of Faith Church, 300 mourners froze. Was that a car backfiring? Thunder from a sudden storm? Then came the second shot, the third, then the rapid staccato of automatic gunfire. The church security camera captured figures running in multiple directions. This wasn't a single shooter acting impulsively. This was coordinated. This was planned. 5 shots. A pause. Then 15 more in rapid succession. Outside the church, 6 people fell to the concrete steps where minutes earlier they had hugged and shared memories of Shawn Horneasus Jr. Blood spread across the very ground where mourners had gathered to honor the dead. Inside, panic consumed the sanctuary. Bodies hit the floor, this time from terror, not prayer. Mothers threw themselves over their children. Elderly mourners crouched behind wooden pews. Someone screamed, "They're shooting at the church!" The pastor's microphone picked up his desperate words, "Get down! Everyone down!" Video footage from inside the church shows the chaos. John's casket abandoned at the altar. Funeral programs scattered like confetti across the floor. A child's shoe left behind as families ran for exits that might lead to more gunfire. The shooting lasted 90 seconds. 90 seconds to violate everything sacred. 90 seconds to prove that nowhere, not even God's house, was safe from street violence. Then silence. Then sirens. Police arrived to a scene they had failed to prevent. 6 people lay wounded outside the church, 1 in critical condition. Inside, traumatized mourners who had come to bury one victim of gun violence had nearly become victims themselves. The image that would haunt Pittsburgh, uniformed officers carrying Shawn Horneasus Jr.'s casket to the hearse after the funeral he couldn't have in peace, providing in death the protection they failed to provide in the moments that mattered most. 2 hours after the church shooting, police arrested Shawn Davis, 19 years old. By evening, a 16-year-old had joined him in custody. Both faced attempted homicide charges for the attack on Destiny of Faith Church. The investigation revealed what everyone already suspected. This was retaliation for the October 15th gas station shooting, which had been retaliation for something before that, which had been retaliation for something else. A cycle spinning so fast that nobody remembered who had started it or why. Rob Dennis, standing near the church in the aftermath, told reporters, "You see how quiet it is now? It's always quiet like this. This doesn't happen here." But it had happened, at a church, during a funeral, in broad daylight. If men with guns would shoot up a funeral, what boundary remained? If not at church, then where? If not during final goodbyes, then when? The arrests continued over the following months. November 2nd brought more arrests in the original Cedar Avenue case. But the legal proceedings would prove complicated. By January 2023, homicide charges were dropped against Sharon Troutman and Samuel Pegas, though they still faced conspiracy and weapons charges. The families of the innocent victims spoke to the media with dignity and grace that stood in stark contrast to the violence that had claimed their loved ones. Laura Ayer, Betty's daughter, made a simple plea. "Please lay down your arms. It harms the city, the world. It hurts." Bridget Mahalik, Jacqueline's mother, spoke of the permanent hole left in their family. Her children will still have to live their lives without her. The statistics tell one story. By October 2022, Pittsburgh had matched 2021's homicide rate. But numbers don't capture the empty chairs at Sunday dinner. Numbers don't explain to children why mommy isn't coming home. Mayor Gainey kept appearing at crime scenes, making speeches. "This has to stop," he would say. But the streets had their own momentum, their own laws, their own terrible logic, where shooting up a funeral made perfect sense to someone, somewhere. The failed police protection at the funeral raised serious questions about communication breakdowns and institutional failures. How did officers end up at the wrong address while shooters found the right one? How does a family's request for protection get lost in translation while threats circulate freely on social media? These questions matter because they reveal systemic problems that go beyond individual cases. When communities can't trust that their calls for help will be answered, when sacred spaces can't be protected, when children can't attend funerals without fear of gunfire, the social contract has broken down completely. Let's talk about the real cost of what happened in Pittsburgh. It's not just the lives lost or the families destroyed, though those costs are immeasurable. It's the trust that died along with Betty Ayer and Jacqueline Mahalik. It's the innocence lost when children learned that even churches aren't safe. It's the fear that settled over a community like a heavy blanket. Betty Ayer, 59, grandmother of 7, died waiting for the number 54 bus. She had no involvement in any dispute. Her crime was existing in the wrong place when men decided to solve problems with bullets. Jacqueline Mahalik, 33, mother of 2, died walking to work. She was running late and trying to provide for her family. Her children will grow up without their mother because someone else's conflict spilled into her path. James Horneasus Jr, 20, died in a war he had helped escalate but might have walked away from given time and different choices. His death sparked the very retaliation that turned his funeral into a crime scene. The 6 people wounded at the church shooting carry physical and emotional scars that will last forever. The 300 mourners who dove for cover in the sanctuary will forever associate church services with the sound of gunfire. This is the true anatomy of street violence. It metastasizes. It spreads beyond its original boundaries, consuming innocent lives and sacred spaces. It turns grandmothers into casualties and sanctuaries into battlegrounds. What can we learn from this tragedy? First, that the cycle of retaliation rarely stays contained to those who initiated it. Betty Ayer and Jacqueline Mahalik weren't part of any gang or street dispute, but they died anyway. Innocent people always pay the price for other people's wars. Second, that institutional failures have real consequences. When police protection is requested and approved but fails due to miscommunication, people die. When communities lose faith in official protection, they may turn to street justice instead. Third, that social media and instant communication can escalate conflicts faster than ever before. The threats against James Horneasus Jr.'s funeral spread through digital networks in real time, allowing coordinated attacks that would have been impossible in previous generations. But perhaps most importantly, we learned that some cycles can only be broken by people choosing not to participate. Every act of retaliation creates new grievances. Every funeral shooting creates new enemies. Every innocent death demands its own form of justice. The question isn't just how to stop individual acts of violence, but how to stop the momentum that carries communities from one tragedy to the next. Today, if you visit the corner of Cedar and Stockton in Pittsburgh, you'll find a memorial, flowers for Betty Ayer, photos of Jacqueline Mahalik, candles that neighbors keep lit in their memory. 2 innocent women died. 6 people were wounded at a funeral. Multiple young men are dead or in prison. Families are destroyed. A community is traumatized. And for what? Territory that nobody really owns? Respect that bullets can't actually earn? A street code that turns grandmothers into casualties? The story of the Pittsburgh church shooting isn't just about one tragic day or one failed police deployment. It's about how quickly violence can spiral beyond anyone's control. How innocent people become collateral damage in wars they never chose to join, and how the pursuit of street justice ultimately destroys the very communities it claims to protect. Betty Ayer and Jacqueline Mahalik deserve to be remembered not as statistics in Pittsburgh's homicide count, but as human beings whose lives had value, whose deaths were meaningless, and whose families still grieve their absence every single day. If this case teaches us anything, it's that in the arithmetic of revenge, nobody wins. Everyone loses, and the bill is always paid by people who never owed anything to anyone.